So this topic is regarding the producers, consumers, and competitive market. This lesson will just give you a, brief knowledge regarding how do the producers have it or make a decision, how do the consumers make a decision, and how these two uh, sectors actually make a decision in a certain kinds of competitive markets or markets itself. Now, first is let's begin with the consumer behavior. Consumer behavior is just simply how do consumers make a decision when it comes to buying the goods and when it comes to allocating the income that they have. Now, since the consumer behavior depends on how people actually buy a products and how do they distribute the income with the different products that they prefer, therefore, this theory could actually be uh, understood in three distinctive preferences, which is actually the consumer preferences, the budget constraints, and the consumer choices. So, with these three concepts, what do the consumers actually do? So, in this one, the way we answer this is comes first with the consumer preferences, because in a certain market, consumer preferences or that consumer taste and preferences is considered to be the foundation of demand. Why is it considered to be the foundation of demand? It is because this would be the basis how do the producers produce certain goods, and how uh, do a certain market establish its demand. It is because of how do people prefer or how do people taste. Okay, so with this one, when we say consumer preferences is, let's start first with analyzing the market basket, or what is it actually within in a certain market. Now, as it is stated here, as it is stated in our definitions of a market basket, okay. Now we could actually say that a market basket is considered to be a table or a list where there are different kinds of goods and services that these consumers prefer. So a certain market basket specify these different goods with the quantities that we are actually wanting to buy. Okay, so in other words, in a certain market, an economist could actually consider this one as a bundle. Why is it considered to be a bundle? Because a certain market basket composes the different classifications of the goods and services that we buy. So simply, in a certain market basket, it would just put there, let's say, technologies, gadgets, clothing, housing, wherein it does not specifically specify if the housing is a two-layer or the full or the clothings are luxury or not. So it is actually a bundle. It shows a bundle. Okay. Now, in analyzing this one, is let's start first, or in analyzing the consumer behaviors, let's start how do the people actually behave or make a decision in terms of consumer preferences. Okay, now a consumer preferences, we have to take note that there are actually the three uh, assumptions. These are the three very important assumptions, but it is of course meron tayong isa which will be introducing at the latter part of this one. Now, the first assumption is that preferences are complete. So that we could understand why do the people buy such a lot of product, or why do they prefer to buy those goods, why do they prefer them compared to the other, why is their tastes are changing, is let's assume first so that we could understand. Let's assume na yung preferences of these people are considered to be complete. Meaning, when we say complete, is that all the goods and the services that they are preferring or that they are wanting is listed on their market basket. Okay, so that we could actually easily rank them, which is the most priority and which is the least priority to buy, or which one are we going to buy more and which one are we going to buy least. Okay, so that is how important uh, preference must be complete as an assumption. The second assumption is referring to the preferences are transitive. When we say preferences are transitive, that means the consumer must be consistent when it comes to preferring the goods. Okay, let's say, how does it possible now? So for example, if a consumer would prefer to buy the product A, that means he is going to buy the product A. Now, with a lot, or with those more goods that they are listed, or which are listed on their market basket, now if they're going to say, I preferred clothing compared to food, but I preferred food compared to leisure. So that means automatically I would say that I would prefer food compared to leisure. That is consistency. You cannot say na I prefer this food compared more to others, which is not consistent. Parang ang consistency kasi dapat we have to make a choice according to the ranks. If you prefer A compared to B and prefer B compared to C, then automatically you prefer A compared to C. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin that you prefer C compared to A, because according to the ranking, you prefer A compared to B and B compared to C. Okay? And then the last assumption is that more is better. When we say more is better, of course, as a certain consumer, we prefer to buy more, because the more, it would give us more satisfaction. Okay, so those are the three important assumptions that we have to take note when it comes to understanding what is a consumer preferences. So that means why a certain consumer prefer to buy this bundle A compared to B, because all of their preferences are there completely. They rank them, and that person is consistent. And of course, the more that he's going to buy that, that means that that person is going to be satisfied more. Okay. Now, to the theory that could explain the consumer preferences is considered to be the indifference curve. An indifference curve is just a graphical illustration that would actually show to you your preferences compared to the other, and how do you prefer more, and what will happen to the other if you prefer more. Okay, but in the indifference curve, we have to assume that we only have two choices, because a certain curve or a certain graph, okay, a certain graph could only show us the x and the y axis. So therefore, in this indifference curve, we have to assume two products, because in a certain graph we only have y and then the x-axis. So that means the y here represent another good, and then the x here represent another good. That is the assumption. But these two goods represents the bundles of goods. So that means if this is clothing, the y is a clothing, it will represent the different kinds of clothes that you're going to choose. If this one is a leisure, the x one is considered to be a leisure, then it will represent the different kinds of services that refers to leisure itself. So it depends on your own choices. Okay, so that, remember that when it comes to indifference curve. Now this is an example on your screen. This is an example of what we call a market basket. Now a market basket, as you can see on your uh, screen, it composes from market basket A, B, D, E, G, H. So these are considered to be bundles of goods and services that a certain uh, person or a consumer could buy. And this one, this A, B, D, E, G, represents also a combination of the different goods that you are wanting to buy. So in here we have a food and a clothing. So that means the market basket A represents or shows us the 2 units of food that you're going to buy and the 30 units of clothing, and so forth. So that means as a consumer, you could choose actually to these different kinds of market basket when it comes to buying. Now take note that in this case, all market basket must be completely exhausted. That means you have to buy them according to your preferences. Okay? Um, if you're going to show it graphically. How are we going to show the graphical illustration of the table? So that means you are just going to plot it. Okay, the different combinations. Ngayon, nasa inyo na kung alin dyan ang pipiliin nyo with the different points on the graph itself. Is you could choose which one. Are you going to choose the bundle B, bundle H, bundle A, and etc. Now, if you're going to look at your screen, we have the pink color and the blue color in here, which just explains yung first assumption na kung saan it must be complete, and it also assumes or it shows the third assumption, which is also more is better. So if you would be a consumer, if you're going to look at compare all the different dots or the different bundles on the table itself, E is the farthest away from the point of origin. That means the farther that point to the point of origin, to this point of origin, that means this is more. Now remember, more is better. So if you would be a consumer, you're going to choose the bundle E compared to the different bundles here. Now, the G here shows us naman that as a person, you're not going to choose this because it just composes the least number of the combination of clothings and food. So that means, if possible, ayaw mo yun because the lesser also the satisfaction. The more the satisfaction also. Okay, so that is how you're going to choose when it comes to the different bundles as stated on our graphical itself. Now, if you're going to, what do you call this one, connect all the dots, no? Now, hindi kayo makakakuha ng magandang result. So, a certain preference will never be like this. If you're going to have exactly two kinds of product, then your preference will never be like this. Because remember, a person, the first time a person will, what you call some consume the product, the satisfaction is very high. But if you're going to consume the same product more and more and more, the satisfaction is going to be lesser and lesser. Why? Because you know already the taste from the very beginning that you already consumed it. Okay, or you know already the feeling when the first time that you avail the service itself. That's why a certain consumer preference will never be this kind. Okay, if you're going to connect. So therefore, how are we going to show this, or how are we going to connect the different dots itself? Okay, now this would be the illustration of that indifference curve, or this is how you're going to connect it. Now when it comes to connecting, you connect which those or those product that be on the same axis or on the same what do you call this one, uh, directions, so that you would have a perfect way or a certain curve that will actually show you or explain to you how do people actually behaves. Because the indifference curve is considered to be downward sloping and it is convex to the point of origin. That means ganito ang convex. So in this case, okay, in this case, this will now explains to us that if one person is going to choose this kind of bundle, then it is better. But is there a possibility that he's going to choose the bundle A, bundle D? Yes, of course. But if that person will have to choose bundle A over bundle B, that means that person has to sacrifice some of the clothing so that he could acquire more of the food itself. Because you can never have more of the other product if you will not sacrifice one of the other product. Because remember the saying, nothing is seem to be free if you're going to consume more. Because if you want to consume more, you have to sacrifice something. But how come some people are treating us for free? Now, if that person is treating you for free, that means that person sacrifices something just for you to be treated for free. Okay? So remember that. Okay? So that means the more that you're going down the indifference curve, that means the more that you're going to sacrifice more of the other product, and you're going to consume more of the other product. Okay, there. So it also explains, the indifference curve also explains to us that that means that the more that we consume of the other product, the lesser also our satisfaction from that product. Okay? Kasi nga sabi ko, let's say for example, the first time they let me taste a certain meat, oh, it tastes good. But the second time that I taste the same one, of course I know the taste already. So therefore my satisfaction is lesser compared to the first time that I tasted it. Okay? So that means, so in this case, if the first time I did taste it, that would be my satisfaction. Now the second time it will be lower and lower and lower. Okay? So that is how also the indifference curve shows your behavior when it comes to changing or choosing the product itself. Okay, so another one is if you're going to make a certain curve for this different dots, is that is possible, but that will now shows us another indifference curve. Okay, it will show us another or different indifference curve. So if you would be a person, okay, with those different kinds of indifference curve, now the B, bundle A, and bundle D is less preferable compared to bundle E, because as I mentioned earlier, bundle E is the best one because that is the farthest among, and that is the more. Okay, it has a greater quantity compared to the others. So therefore, I have to choose this one. Okay. Now, this is what we call naman, in the screen, this is what we call your indifference map. An indifference map composes different kinds of indifference curve, wherein with those different indifference curve, that means this shows us different combinations of goods. Okay, wherein a certain person could now uh, make a decision when it comes to choices. That is certain part of consumer behavior. Pinapakita niya yung choices ng mga consumers because of this different kinds of or different illustrations of the indifference curve. Okay, so in this one, if you would be a person, of course you're going to choose the combination indifference curve 3 compared to the two kinds of indifference curve. Why? Again, you go back to the assumption, the more is better, which in this indifference curve, the indifference curve 3 is going to be preferable. Okay, now take note, this indifference curve never intersect with one another. Kasi hindi nag-overlap ang ating likes. Now, if for example, if you're going to choose a certain kind of bundle with this kind of amount, syempre, it will never be the same with this one. If you're going to choose for the second time, it would either be lesser or it would be either greater. That's why it will never intersect with one another. And all indifference curves are considered to be downward sloping. Okay? Why is it downward sloping? Because it explains what we call your trade-off. Okay? What is trade-off? This is considered to be your sacrifices. Okay? And then the downward sloping curve also will be mathematically functioned or can be explained through a mathematical expressions. So that is the indifference map itself. Now, let's see specifically the indifference curve itself. Now, since an indifference curve represents us this indifference curve represents our preferences, then that means the behavior of the consumer of sacrificing some of the products so that they could gain more, or sacrificing this food to gain more of clothing, could now be understood through a function which we call your marginal rate of substitution. The marginal rate of substitution is considered to be the slope of the indifference curve. Okay, now the slope of the indifference curve explains to us this one. Okay, it is considered to be the magnitude. That is considered to be the magnitude of the slope of the indifference curve, which measures the consumer marginal rate of substitution between two goods. In this figure, the MRS between the clothing and the food falls from 6 between A and B, 4 between B and D, 2 between D and E, 1 between E and G, wherein the marginal rate of substitution diminishes along the indifference curve. Okay, why does it diminishes? You go back again to the concept of your trade-off. Okay, it will always diminishes because of the trade-off, because the more that we get, the we have to sacrifice of the other one. Okay, so how do we actually solve for the marginal rate of substitution? The marginal rate of substitution could actually be what do you call this one, could be uh, solved through the change and the quantity of the other good compared to the change in the quantity of the other good. Okay, so the changes in here divided by the changes in here will give us the MRS. Okay, but simply we will see to it the uh, simple functions of it or the equations of it. Okay, now how are we? There is also the functions of the indifference curve or your satisfaction, which is considered to be the utility function. The utility function here explains to us the indifference curve, or it explains to us how a certain person make a preferences between and among the two different kinds of good itself. Okay, so the utility function here, it is the utility as a function of the good x and then the good y. Depende po kung ano yung good x nyo. Now, on our example, it is a food and a clothing. So this one is the utility as a function of the food and as a function of the clothing. So therefore, it could be represented by x plus b and y, which is simply as the they call this one on the mathematical term as y is equivalent to mx plus b, which is also the same. Okay? Ganyan po siya. Now, the utility function will now represent us or will now explains us how more are we satisfied when it comes to consuming the different kinds of goods. Okay, this one, the number 4 here, which is considered to be the convexity, ito yung pang-apat na assumption of the indifference curve, wherein this convexity explains to us actually the curve. Okay, ito, the convexity of the curve. That means it explains to us that the indifference curve must always be convex to the point of origin because it explains to us the diminishing marginal rate of substitution or the diminishing MRS. Okay, because an MRS will never be like this if we do not have a convex to the point of origin na klase or itsura ng indifference curve natin. Okay? There. So, those are considered to be the simple analysis when it comes to your indifference curve itself. Now, the next one here would be the second, what do you call this one? The second concept of the consumer behavior, which is the budget constraint. Dito lang, in the indifference curve, it just explains to us how we actually make a decision, or how do we actually prefer one good compared to the other. Okay, by means of making a trade-off. Okay, and how well are we satisfied is through the utility function. Okay, so that means the utility function here explains to us is that if you're going to sacrifice more of the other, we have to gain this one. But if we want to gain more of the y, we have to sacrifice some of the x. That is how this consumer preferences is being illustrated. So the next topic here, or the next presentation, would now be the budget constraints. So I hope that This simple presentation could now help you when it comes to understanding the topic of the consumer behavior.